Long before forests grew dense and familiar, before humans shaped the land with fences and farms, a shadow moved across the open plains of Ice Age Europe. It was not a predator, nor a fleeting herd animal. It was something larger, slower, and unmistakably dominant in presence. The Irish elk stood taller than any deer alive today, its silhouette crowned by antlers so vast they seemed almost unreal, as if nature itself had pushed design beyond reason. Despite its name, the Irish elk was not confined to Ireland, nor was it truly an elk in the modern sense. Known scientifically as Megaloceros giganteus, it ranged across much of Europe and into Asia, thriving in open grasslands shaped by cold climates and seasonal extremes. Its bones, later pulled from peat bogs and riverbanks, would inspire myths, confusion, and awe, evidence of an animal that felt too grand to be real. Evolution carved the Irish elk into a masterpiece of excess. Males carried antlers that could span over 4 meters from tip to tip, weighing more than a grown human child. These structures were not weapons for survival, but symbols, elaborate signals shaped by sexual selection. Generation after generation, larger antlers meant greater reproductive success. Females chose size, and size rewrote the body. To support such weight, the Irish elk evolved a massive frame. Long legs lifted its body high above the ground. A powerful neck anchored antlers that defied gravity. Muscles thickened, bones strengthened, and posture adapted to balance elegance with endurance. This was not an agile forest creature. It belonged to open land, where space allowed its crown to exist. Life for the Irish elk followed the rhythm of the Ice Age. Seasonal migrations tracked fresh grasses and retreating snow. Its diet consisted primarily of nutrient-rich vegetation that flourished in cold, open environments. In spring and summer, abundance fueled growth. In autumn, preparation began. Winters were harsh, unforgiving, and survival depended on fat reserves and resilience rather than speed. Socially, the Irish elk likely lived in loose groups, gathering in greater numbers during mating seasons. It was then that the true cost of its beauty became clear. Males displayed their antlers not through combat alone, but through presence, standing tall, moving slowly, turning their heads so light caught every curve and branch. Dominance was visible before it was tested. Actual fights were rare, dangerous, and often unnecessary. The antlers did their work without collision, but there was a limit to how far nature could be pushed. As the Ice Age began to wane, landscapes changed. Open plains slowly gave way to forests. Grasses retreated, trees closed in. What had once been an advantage became a burden. Antlers that ruled open land became liabilities among branches. Movement grew restricted, feeding patterns shifted, nutrient availability declined, subtly at first, then decisively. At the same time, humans expanded across these territories. Hunters encountered an animal that was slow, visible, and rich in meat. Even without overhunting, pressure increased. Survival margins narrowed. Reproduction slowed. The Irish elk found itself perfectly adapted to a world that was quietly disappearing. Its extinction was not sudden. It unfolded over generations. Fewer calves survived. Antlers shrank slightly, then inconsistently. The balance between beauty and survival broke. By the end of the last Ice Age, the Irish elk was gone, not erased by catastrophe, but by change. What remains are bones, antlers preserved in earth, and a lesson carved into prehistory. Evolution can create giants, but it offers no guarantees. When the environment shifts, excess becomes fragility. And yet, even in absence, the Irish elk endures, as a reminder that nature's greatest creations are often also its most vulnerable. To exist as the Irish elk was to live permanently on the edge of possibility. Its body represented a precise compromise between strength and burden, a balance maintained only as long as the world remained predictable. Every season tested that balance. Every year demanded enough food, enough space, enough time. For thousands of years, the equation held. Then, quietly, it stopped working. The antlers, so often blamed for the species' extinction, were not a flaw in isolation. They were functional within the ecological context that created them. In open steppe environments, they posed little problem. There were no tight corridors, no dense thickets to trap their spread. Visibility was high, movement was linear, and the cost of carrying such structures was offset by reproductive success. But evolution does not anticipate sudden change. It refines for the present, not the future. As temperatures rose and glaciers retreated, vegetation transformed. Grasslands fragmented, shrubs advanced, forests closed ranks, nutrient profiles shifted subtly but decisively. Plants richer in minerals necessary for antler growth became scarcer, forcing males to invest more energy into maintaining traits that once came easily. The body responded as it always does under stress, by prioritizing survival over display. But in a species driven by sexual selection, reducing display meant reducing reproduction. The Irish elk likely experienced increasing asymmetry in antler growth during its final centuries. Fossil evidence suggests irregularities, signs of nutritional stress rather than sudden genetic collapse. This was not a species failing catastrophically. It was one slowly negotiating a narrowing margin of error. Human presence added pressure without needing to dominate the narrative. Early humans did not need to hunt Irish elk to extinction for their impact to matter. Competition for land, disruption of migration routes, and selective hunting of the largest individuals all compounded existing stress. Removing the biggest males meant altering mating dynamics, reducing genetic diversity, and accelerating decline without ever appearing excessive. Unlike predators that can shift prey or habitats, the Irish elk was locked into its design. It could not simply become smaller without losing the very trait that defined reproductive success. It could not retreat into forests without sacrificing mobility. It could not speed up its life cycle without breaking developmental constraints. Specialization, once its greatest advantage, became an evolutionary dead end. There is a tendency to romanticize the Irish elk as a victim of vanity, a creature destroyed by its own beauty. The truth is more subtle and more unsettling. The Irish elk did nothing wrong. It followed the rules of evolution perfectly. It responded to selection pressures with precision. It thrived until the rules themselves changed faster than biology could respond. Extinction, in this case, was not a failure of strength, intelligence, or adaptability. It was a failure of timing, a mismatch between body and world. A reminder that evolution has no foresight, only momentum. As populations declined, social structures likely fractured. Smaller groups meant fewer displays, fewer successful matings, fewer calves. Silence replaced spectacle. Where once antlers stretched across horizons, now only empty plains remained. The disappearance would have gone largely unnoticed by the humans who shared the land, focused on their own survival in a changing climate. Yet the absence left a mark. Ecosystems adjusted, grazing patterns shifted, vegetation grew differently, a role vanished, leaving space that would never be filled in quite the same way. The Irish elk was not replaced. It was removed. Today, when its antlers are reconstructed in museums, they overwhelm the space around them. They feel excessive, improbable, almost defiant. But they are honest. They show us what happens when natural selection pushes a trait to its limit, and the world refuses to stay still. When the Irish elk finally disappeared, there was no single moment of collapse. No last stand, no dramatic scene carved into memory. The end arrived the way many extinctions do, quietly, unevenly, without witnesses who understood what they were seeing. A population failed to recover one spring. A migration did not complete. A mating season passed with fewer displays, fewer antlers rising against the sky. And then, eventually, none at all. The land did not mourn. Grasslands continued to shift into forests. New species expanded into spaces once shaped by the heavy steps of giant deer. Nature, indifferent and efficient, adjusted. It always does. What was lost was not balance, but history, a lineage millions of years in the making, erased not by catastrophe, but by incompatibility. The Irish elk represents one of the clearest examples of how specialization can become a trap. Its antlers were not excess in a moral sense. They were excess in an ecological sense, a trait refined beyond flexibility. As long as the world remained open, cold, and rich in minerals, the system worked. Once it did not, there was no alternate path. Evolution had already spent its options. This is what makes the Irish elk so unsettling. It was not weak. It was not slow in a way that doomed it. It was not outcompeted by a superior species. It simply belonged to a world that no longer existed. And when that world faded, the elk faded with it. Modern science often searches for single causes, climate change or human hunting, nutritional stress or habitat loss. In truth, extinction rarely obeys simplicity. The Irish elk vanished because multiple pressures aligned just closely enough to remove margin after margin of survival. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Together, they were final. There is a temptation to imagine that, given more time, the Irish elk might have adapted, smaller antlers, lighter bodies, altered behaviors. But adaptation requires generations under stable selection. The pace of environmental change at the end of the Ice Age was faster than biology could negotiate. The species was asked to rewrite itself too quickly, and evolution does not work that way. What remains today are fragments. Antlers preserved in peat, bones reconstructed in galleries, silhouettes printed in textbooks. These remains inspire awe, but they also distort reality. They freeze the Irish elk at its most dramatic, its most exaggerated moment. They do not show the long decline, the subtle stress, the quiet failure to reproduce that truly defined its end. In this sense, the Irish elk has become a symbol not of extravagance, but of fragility hidden within success. It reminds us that being perfectly adapted to the present can be the most dangerous position of all when the future refuses to resemble it. As the imaginary camera pulls back across ancient plains, there is nothing left to film. No movement, no antlers catching the light. Only landscape, reshaped, repopulated, indifferent. The absence feels heavier than presence ever did. And that may be the final lesson of the Irish elk. Extinction does not announce itself. It does not ask permission. It simply leaves a space where something once stood, and trusts time to make us forget it was ever for.